All right, assembled before you are four experts in cybersecurity, information, threat sharing, and intelligence. The next part of this interaction is I'll ask the panel members to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are and what they do. I have some prepared questions to stimulate the conversation, and then we're hoping that a few of you will ask questions of the panel and keep the conversation going. So let's start to my immediate left.
Sure. Good to be here. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to all the sponsors and to the foundation for hosting us. Ron Plesco with KPMG. I'm a principal partner nationally. I run to the left of incident, cyber threat intelligence, and also incident response. My day job consists of doing cyber assessments for our clients, also in the healthcare space, figuring out who's coming after them, what the tactic techniques and procedures are, do they have controls in place to stop that. To the right, my teams that I'm part of respond to our clients' incidents, to the breach incidents. As I talk to you right now, spent the last 3 weeks at a healthcare entity somewhere out there in the United States that got hit about 4 weeks ago. So with that, when I talk today, representing KPMG, I also sit on the board of a global nonprofit called the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, formed in 1997 to share cyber threat intelligence. Law enforcement intelligence community, U.S. and 34 countries, and about 3,000 companies, including healthcare entities, all share through that. We feed ISAC's intelligence. So with that, happy to be here and have a good conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Next.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Chris and to all of our sponsors and to ICIT. It's great to be here this morning. I'm Robert Lord, co-founder and president of Protenus, healthcare's premier analytics platform for the detection and remediation of various inappropriate activities in the electronic health record and associated systems. What we do is really understand in great depth the individual workflows of various individuals who use the electronic health record and associated systems, and detect insider threats, HIPAA breaches, events like drug diversion or other types of potentially clinically or administratively dangerous activities. So really serve as that immune system for a healthcare facility.
And I'm Travis Farral. I'm with a company called Anomali. We are the platform that HITrust uses to share with its members. I come from a practitioner's background. I worked at Nokia for 11 years, spent 7 years at ExxonMobil running the threat intelligence team there. And I'm currently the director of security strategy for Anomali, and we just do what we can to try to help organizations operationalize threat intelligence and get some meaning from all of that random data that comes through.
Good morning. My name is Michael Seguinot. I'm director with Exabeam, also contributing member here at ICIT. Exabeam is a next generation platform, cybersecurity solution. We'll talk a little bit about how we're leveraging threat intel data and working with the federal government and solving some of their solutions. Thank you.
All right, well, it's been a busy several months, going back to March with the, there was a Apache Struts infection that affected a number of U.S. and international organizations. Then Mother's Day weekend was the WannaCry event. A little bit later that month and into June, there started to be early indications of something that we dubbed Petya. A little bit after that, a couple of weeks after that, there was a not Petya. Don't be confused with Petya. It was not Petya. And then Apache Struts reared its head again. So to start with, I'd like to ask the panel members, and we'll start with you, your views on the current state of threat intelligence. Specifically, what are we doing well to share threat intelligence, and what do we need to improve on, and how?
Well, so a great bunch of questions. Let me tee it up this way. In the last year, we've seen the release of nation-state weaponized code from the U.S. and from other nation states through some releases that took place that were well publicized. I won't get into those. Because of those, you've seen the weaponization of those by organized criminal groups as well as nation state and cyber terrorist groups. With that, you see those different organized criminal groups targeting vectors into healthcare and other industries that they can make money off of by stealing data. So to your question, what are we doing and what are we doing well? I think from an information sharing analysis center standpoint, years and years ago when I got into this game working for Governor Ridge here in DC, standing up the NCSD, the whole concept was, hey, you don't have a clearance, you don't have the right to know. We moved from that to sort of this need to share, I'd say about 5 or 6 years ago. Back in the day, people, for political reasons, became part of ISACs, and we're wondering why the lobbyist was in the room and why the guys on this panel that don't have ties on that are techies weren't in the room figuring out how to share. So I think, fast forward to where we are today, the real-time intelligence sharing that's taking place amongst the private sector, either through HKIC, NKIC, those entities, or with each other, the force multiplication opportunity that those private sector companies are doing or exploiting for their benefit, for an ROI, return on intelligence. Sharing that's taking place is a good thing. If I look at the industry, we've moved. The threat actors have moved as well. They're targeting different things, anything that's fungible, of course, if it's organized crime, if they can make money. And so we're constantly in this game of whack-a-mole. You ask me my opinion, this is my opinion. I'm looking at the camera and smiling because my corporate overlords are going to be watching this. My opinion is we still got a long way to go. Even though all this information is being shared, how is it being shared? Contextual intelligence, it's in an email. I can't tell you how many of my clients I go to that got an email from an ISAC weeks before, and they still got owned. So we have to do that in machine time. We have to share that information in real time. If I look at the better companies out there, financial sector and others that are doing this and doing this effectively, Chris even said in his beginning remarks, 20% of the healthcare industry does this near real time, machine learning in real time. That's the only way you're going to stay on top of this. The contextual intelligence is great, especially for the remaining 80%. I think from our standpoint, how do we increase cyber hygiene at the endpoint? How do we detect and respond effectively? And how do you incentivize intelligence sharing in that force multiplication approach? Those are the questions that I'm still struggling with. So
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I really think that was well put. I concur with a lot of that. I think we're really seeing forward movement, though we've got a long way to go when it comes to threat sharing, but it is heartening to see a lot of the developments, especially over the last couple of years on this front. One of the things that we don't see a lot of discussion on, and particularly in our space really related to insider threats and breaches, is good intelligence sharing when it comes to these insider threats. How do we really understand what's going on inside of our healthcare institutions? And in fact, if you look at the incidents that occur, at least those that are publicly reported and ultimately lead to these publicly reported breaches, you've got greater than 40% of these coming from these insider types of actors. And one of the challenges is that threat intelligence really isn't constructed in such a way to understand the signatures associated with these individuals, to understand what these patterns might look like, and really to systematically share across organizations how we can thwart these types of patterns moving forward. And so I think that if I look forward to where things are, we've got to continue the momentum when it comes to more of these external actors, and then also shift part of the conversation to say, how can we, in an automated and artificial intelligence leveraging way, continuously understand these individual insider workflows and then share that across organizations, again, in machine time? How are we really understanding how these threats evolve and then how they connect back to the ultimate resolution of them?
Great. Travis?
Yeah, great comments so far. Definitely agree with a lot of the comments that have been made, so I won't restate a lot of that. But I will focus in on a couple of things. Chris mentioned, talking about WannaCry and Petya, not Petya. And you see what happens when these things happen, and they're very broad, and there's a lot of sharing that's going on. But the best sharing that's happening is sort of the real-time sharing over, non-official mediums like Twitter, back channel discussions amongst peers, and before you start seeing any finished intelligence or any official details coming across, through the official sharing stuff, it's usually bubbled up from the collaboration that happens in these other mediums. And I think that's great, but I think, as the other panelists have already mentioned, there's still a lot of maturity that needs to happen in the official sharing spaces. One of the interesting things that I've been, peaked eyebrows at is HITRUST has this program called CTX, And what they do is it's basically just automated sharing of interesting and sort of high-value indicators. And I think that program has been pretty successful, and I think that's maybe a model that we should look at, not just in healthcare, but across other spaces as well, as a way to, get information where it needs to go faster. So, that's all I've got to add on that.
Thank you.
It's not much more to add. I don't really have much more to add. I would say, as a non-threat intel person, I would agree that a lot has changed in the last few years, and I do think it's a good point you made, how it used to be a need to know, and now a lot of people are more likely to share. From my perspective, I also look at threat intel kind of like I look at the weather, in the sense, if you think about weather was like, 100 years ago, we really didn't know what the weather was going to be like. We couldn't predict storms. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't understand the atmosphere. I look at threat intel as very much like weather. Now we understand more. We're sharing more. I view that in the future there'll be a weather channel for cyber intel threat, right? You'll be able to turn on the internet and see what the cyber intel threat are going on, what the landscape looks like. I think in the past, a lot that's been proprietary. A lot of companies have kind of kept it to themselves or their pretty dashboards, but I do think that's where we're going as an enterprise, and I think it's important. If you look at the breaches going on today, it's the same type of attacks, the same type of breaches, patching not being done. So it goes back to we can share that intel. And I also share the context of the intel. I think that came up a lot this morning. I think that's even more important. I don't want to mess up this quote, but someone mentioned to me, I think it's information without context is really ignorance. Information with proper context is intelligence, and that's what you get with proper threat intel.
Great comments, thank you. At HHS, we spent about $14 billion across our operating divisions in IT last year. About $315 million of that went to cybersecurity. We've analyzed that spend, and it appears that about 80% of our cybersecurity spend goes to the right side of an incident, the respond and recover. And our CIO has directed us to start making investments on the prevent, identify, and detect side, the left side of an incident. Move 80% of our spending to that side of the incident timeline. I like that. For the panel, and we'll start at the far end this time and work back this way. Threat intelligence technologies and capabilities are evolving at a rapid pace. What are some new cutting-edge technologies or approaches you have seen which can be implemented to better defend the sector?
So from my perspective, again, Exabeam, we're a security platform, and we've seen an evolution in threat intel. I'd say a few years ago, there are a lot of different proprietary vendors who kind of kept their stuff to themselves. What I've seen now is there's more open partnerships, more open sharing of that information. I know we're partnered with Anomali, who's on the panel with us in several accounts. What we've seen is from our customer's perspective, what we do a very good job of is detecting threats inside our threat, but getting that outside intel and getting the context of it that other companies can provide. And again, I'll give a plug to Anomali. They do a very good job of pulling in various different threat intel. They pull in from the government, from the HHS, I believe HHS, I know DHS, but they pull that threat intel in for our customers and really add value there. So I know for me in the federal government, threat intel is very critical in seeing that integration so that a customer can make a very fast decision and then even get to that automation phase, right, where we can self-defend the network. If you remember, I think it was like 10 years ago, a big company was running those self-defending network commercials online where your network is self-defending. Here we are 10 years later, and we're still not there. Threat intel really is getting us there with the automation capability.
Yeah, thank you for the plug there. So one of the things, speaking of, I think forward-thinking technologies, one of the problems that happens is, you have an organization that gets breached in March and details come out in August or September. All of the indicators that are involved in that may or may not get published publicly, but maybe they're shared through other, ISAC forums or other things like that. But those indicators may revolve around events that happened back in March, and so your organization is just not getting that. And you can, obviously with SIM technologies and other things like our platform, you can, immediately see, have we seen any evidence of this today or the last week or something like that. But you almost really want to go back to March and see, were you also targeted just like that other organization that was breached and you just didn't know it? And this is a hard problem for SIM to solve because, going back through that much data, you're talking about lots of log events, this is a big problem. It's a big data problem. So one of the things that we've come up with is a product called Anomali Enterprise, and it's designed specifically to solve this problem. So as new indicators come in, you're immediately able to go back in seconds or minutes across, not just months, but maybe a year's worth of data, and it can tell you, okay, here's a timeline of where you've had any hits related to that data, and additional context from internal sources that you may need to go dig through that and actually hunt. So I think that's a really cool, even as it's from my company, but even as somebody who used to work in the field, that is a really cool technology that I think is, kind of helping push things forward.
Thank you.
When I think about advances on this front, I think about perhaps the low-tech and the high-tech. From a low-tech perspective, I think that, as Chris was mentioning earlier, there is a real need to be able to push valuable, consumable types of reports to your small and medium types of enterprise in healthcare. The Healthcare Cybersecurity Task Force clearly identified this as a major pillar that we need to focus on moving forward. One of the things we did at Protenus was we release on a monthly basis, totally free, third-party research, something called the Breach Barometer, that basically just covers all of the events that have occurred in healthcare, provide some context around it, response times, where you might want to be focusing your efforts on that, and is readily consumable by that individual who just works in the office, wants to understand their threat landscape, and where they might want to be investing. Of course, on the high-tech side, our real bread and butter and what we do is what we've seen in healthcare, and for a lot of other industries, is a challenge related to sector-specific cybersecurity, particularly when it comes to insider threats. To deeply understand what's appropriate and inappropriate in a healthcare context, to really sift through those logs, you can't just use those logs or the threat intelligence that might come in. As you're mentioning, you've got to really fuse a lot of information together, but one of the challenges is you also need to add in clinical context and administrative context. You need to understand at the level of what types of diagnoses does this individual treat? What types of individual billing activities does this person perform? How does someone move through the medical record or a lab system or a pharmacy system? And all these are incredibly subtle and really have to be focused on a lot of content knowledge, which now with a lot of the advances in artificial intelligence and big data, which of course we all know are buzzwords du jour that we're talking about and have varied or non-meanings perhaps in many cases, but are ultimately pretty important when you get down to the technique level of it. How can we use those techniques ultimately to solve real business cases and to really understand how we can tackle these insider threats in a way that's aware of the underlying healthcare ground truth? And I think that's where we're actually going to see a lot of advances and bending the curve. How do we get to that elimination of false positives, that accuracy, that real natural language context that helps people resolve these rather than just sift through tons and tons of data?
Thank you.
Sure. So being the last one, the comment I get to say, ditto, I bid, et cetera. It's everyone to my left, so I agree with all those comments. What I'd add, I think specifically to the question, so what technologies have we seen? So the good or the bad from a KPMG standpoint, and I think it's all good, is we're vendor neutral. So I go in, my teams, myself, we go in and do our work at our clients, and they're using every vendor under the sun. So with that, some of the advancements that I've seen, if you go back a couple of years ago, think Cisco, Palo Alto, IBM, and others, the machines that are deployed that you use, if they're configured the right way, they're getting real-time updates from all of Cisco's clients, uses their hardware globally. Same with IBM, same with Palo Alto. Of course, that comes with a feature, which means a little bit more payment. So if I think about that and I think, how do you prevent this? Well, it's the real-time machine sharing. And it's force multiplication, not sector specific. Microsoft, from an OS standpoint, moved that way years ago. Microsoft desktops all share if you allow them to, and learn from each other, Microsoft OSs. So those improvements I've seen on the prevent side. On the share side, hats off to Anomali. They don't like this, Threat Connect and others that have figured out platforms and how to share. So how do you put this together? Einstein. I don't even know what Einstein we're on right now, 20 maybe? But if I go back to early days of Einstein and think threat intelligence sharing, how do you put together a connected platform? Anomalies figured that out, so has Threat Connect. I'm a response guy too, so if I look at that and I say, what are the technologies that I think have come a long way? SIMs that aren't just ticketing systems, Splunk, and Logarithm and others, if configured correctly, real-time getting that, taking action on that, and being able to respond. To Travis's comment, half of my job, as I said, is a response person. So my biggest challenge is most organizations do not know where their data is. They think they do until there's an incident. And so once there's an incident, how do you go through? Hopefully there's logs. There's firewall logs, application firewall logs, email logs, et cetera, hopefully. And when you get there, how do you get through that very quickly? Anomaly, Enterprise, other solutions that are out there. Nuix came out, Australian intelligence community, quickly index data, get through it to get your IOCs, figure out what happened. So I look at those as the chief technologies. There's a lot more out there that I probably didn't mention. They may or may not be alliance partners with KPMG. So with that, that's my first high-level view.
Thank you.
Sure.
I've heard a couple of the panel members mention insider threat. And depending on which press publication you've read recently, insider threat is the number 2 threat behind ransomware and silly user behavior affecting organizations. As ICIT discussed in its publication earlier this year entitled 2017, The Insider Threat Epidemic Begins. Today's connected world has increased the threats posed by malicious and non-malicious insider threats. How can we improve threat sharing around insider threats, which have historically not been part of a robust threat intelligence program? Let's start with Travis.
Thank you. This is it's a tough problem, and it's not like there's a silver bullet to this kind of thing, but my personal thoughts on this are, we can't have all these islands of information, where we have all these different disparate technologies, a lot of the stuff that's already been discussed here. And it's nice to have partnerships, obviously, like Anomali has with Exabeam and things like that, where we're able to get these systems connected together, sharing information, but I think it needs to go beyond that. One of the initiatives that I think is kind of exciting is the standards body, OASIS, that is behind Styx Taxi, is working on a new standard called OpenC2. And the purpose of this standard is basically to allow a common communication model to operate between different technologies inside the organization. And I think getting information, be able to flow inside the organization very quickly so that smart decisions can be made is a quick way to detect and hopefully isolate and deal with the insider threat problem.
Insider threat, and how do you find data to share? I think the first thing to do is kind of break insider threat into 2 categories. There's probably more than 2, but I look at it as your malicious, negative, he's out to do harm insider, and then your ignorant, accidental, I was phished and didn't know my account was stolen insider. On that side, I think it's about education. We have to continue to educate, and that is a long, it's just, I don't know to tell you. I get phishing attacks that are very complicated, I'm very impressed with, so I can only imagine that the layman is getting hit all the time. That area, I think it's education, understanding the techniques, the tactics, and again, sharing that context. The insider who's malicious, I think is a little more challenging. I think it comes down to modeling behavior, looking how they do stuff. If they're really malicious, they also know what other people have done, so they're better at backtracking. If they're good in IT, they can do really great stuff. I think it's hard to find the silver bullet you can share with everybody. I think what you have to understand, though, is a lot of it is modeling, right? It's not this user doing the same techniques. It might be the way he does information exfiltration, whether it's USB, screenshots. In fact, I saw a great seminar a few weeks ago on how it's easy to take a camera into the office and just sit there and record everything I want to on the screenshot, and you have no insurance, you have no evidence that I even took anything out of your building. So again, you have to look at insider threat. It's very difficult. I think it's education, and it's also modeling what behaviors are going on.
We work exclusively in healthcare when we do our work, and we work exclusively, frankly, on insider threat, especially with relation to the cybersecurity part of our analytics portfolio. And one of the things that we see, especially in healthcare, but we've seen this in other industries as well, more informally with our peers, is that the problem in many cases is actually both a privacy and a security problem. In healthcare, they've got the unique challenge of HIPAA. There are parallels in other industries as well, but a lot of those controls are actually done very much by privacy officers who tend to be more audit focused. They might be attorneys or auditors. And what we see is that A huge transformation that often has to occur on this front is that privacy and security really have to meld together and break down the silos that traditionally separate them. And we kind of see three major advantages that help them on this front. One is more cultural change, thinking about how they can envision their institution not as the privacy and compliance side of the house and the cybersecurity side of the house, but both as really having a shared mission of creating and preserving institutional trust. And so I think that's a real cultural change that can happen when it comes to improving that type of insider threat prevention. Another piece that we see is how do you create that common language, to the earlier points made, and not just doing that in the way that we structure metadata around these threats, but also in the way that we can leverage AI to generate really natural language reports in an automated manner of what's happened. Because especially in healthcare and in many other sectors, you've got to be able to present this information in a way that is very naturally human readable, that's ultimately defensible in court, that's something that you can really show, that's going to be able to go all through the leadership of an organization and really change that culture, which oftentimes, as we've talked about a lot, threat intel is not in that. It's not going to resonate with your average boardroom, that's for sure. And so as you can understand that and track it better, it's going to be a lot more helpful. And then finally, we talk a lot about how we can ingest these threat feeds and then process them at our own organizations. But as these technologies are moving forward, what we really want to do is have platforms that are looking across organizations at insider threats and continuously analyzing and sharing the metadata associated with those threats. So it's not about sharing. It's about using a common platform that is continuously improving. It's using machine learning to get better and better, not just from a single institution, but from all the institutions on that platform. Of course, that doesn't mean sharing your proprietary data, but it does mean sharing the indicators that we see of compromise and our unique understanding of how workflows function in a given industry so we can really better and more accurately detect those threats. So those are, I'd say, the three pillars that I would really look at on that front.
Thank you.
Sarah, I'll leave you with this. I'm probably one of the few attorneys in the room, so former prosecutor, and when I look at these things, and I always answer the question that's asked. The question was, how do you improve intelligence sharing on insider threats? That's a huge challenge. I will tell you, majority of the work that we do on insider threat is all under attorney-client privilege. So our clients are not in a position, and they do not necessarily want to share that information with sector, let alone their competitors related to that. So if I think about a couple that I've worked in the last year, exfil of, I can't tell you the company's under attorney-client privilege, let's just say exfil of intellectual property of a bio type of company from their Chinese operation by the employees through Chinese social media. So how's a DLP solution going to stop that when the cultural business operations there enable that type of social media sharing? Secondly, a lab testing facility where Eastern European organized crime infiltrated that and paid off the people inside the lab to steal the patient data and take that. How do we find that out? An off-duty or on-duty police officer pulled one of the techs over on their way home and saw a bunch of printouts in the back seat. They did have a DLP solution, but Smart asked questions about it, gave up the whole chain, so we got in and did the investigation. So if I think about that in the last one, the keystroke logger installed not in the USB, but inside the ultra-secret SCIF, if you will, of this one company's research facility where one of the employees got down on his knees and underneath while he was cleaning up, spilled coffee, swapped keystroke logger into the input for the keyboard. So those type of incidents, how do you enable threat intelligence sharing in those situations? Our clients, the private sector, if you will, is in a hard place to enable that. It does come with IOCs. How are they exfilling? What are their tactic techniques and procedures related to it? What is their tradecraft? I agree with that. I've been a big fan of taking a taxi to the River Styx, if you will, and open the seat to you, if you will. Big fan of that. But how do you get that information the insider threat information into an actionable format when most of the folks this is all under attorney-client privilege because it's internal investigations? That's a question that I think we have to answer.
Thank you. I have one more prepared question for the panel, and then I would invite you to use the microphone at the back of the room to ask questions. As ICIT Fellow program members, Your organizations support the Institute's various cybersecurity initiatives throughout the year. In addition to ICIT's work, what other resources are available to the community to aid them in understanding and defending against today's most persistent threats? Go ahead.
Sure. So a big fan of ICIT. These type of forums, information sharing, getting that information out there. I said to you at the very beginning, I used to be the CEO of the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. On the board now, those type of entities, other P3 entities like ICIT and others that can get that information out there. NCFTA is a little different. It gets it out there in real time. It has developed with IBM's assistance and others, and Cisco, the weather channel, if you will, for their partners of cyber threats, cyber badness, and contextualization of intelligence. Those type of P3s in partnership with the public sector and the private sector, I think are the only way to really get out in front of this issue. For various legal reasons that I just talked about in my last comments, a lot of private sector organizations are prohibited or cannot share. I've dealt with those attorneys for most of my life, sitting in the room with them and explaining to them why they want to share for fraud prevention, theft prevention, et cetera. They understand it, but yet there's still a legal impediment there to share. I think P3s like ICIT and others are the way to do that. So I applaud ICIT for having this forum today.
Thank you.
You know, I'll speak specifically to healthcare in my area. I think that one of the things that we really try and do at Protenus is produce content that we think is relevant to how we can build trust in healthcare, how we can improve that more specifically. So I'll put in a specific plug for the tool that I mentioned earlier on, the breach barometer that we release on a monthly basis. I think that's been really helpful. We get a lot of positive feedback, and that's continuously improving and really disseminating throughout the healthcare industry a lot more knowledge around what the real breach landscape looks like. In addition, we produce a lot of other content that's highly specific to our sector, really understanding how you can look at different threats, how on the ground, whether you're on the privacy or security side, you can improve culture and various procedures in your organization.
One of the things that is actually in my wheelhouse at Anomali is really kind of outreach and, trying to, do education and whether that's, through webinars or white papers or, interacting directly with different folks. I think this is, the collaboration piece is really kind of the centerpiece of where we need to be as an industry, and it shouldn't matter like who our company is or what organization we're dealing with. I love doing research with other members of other organizations when I can. I love having discussions with some of those organizations that maybe they can't share, but it's always good to have really good contextual discussions around their challenges with them, and try to socialize ideas and thoughts that have come from other places. Bubbling up this information that can be shared into white papers and things that be shared publicly is always a great thing. I love the work that ICIT does around that. So I think it's just a community effort, and the more getting together at events like this and shaking hands and getting to know people, I think really helps, and it goes a long way.
Yeah, I guess to add, I ditto everything everybody said. I would also add, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the social media use groups out there. Meetup has some great cybersecurity groups. I think what's nice about the DC area, there are tons of different free cybersecurity training classes. I know there's one a partner of ours is putting on in November. They're doing a 2-day session on the anatomy of an attack. There's limited registration for that, but I do know there's a lot of education going on in the area. There's several conferences going on. There's 2 in the DC area this week from major security vendors. I'm not going to plug them, but my point is I think it's about education, learning, sharing, always being aware. I like what ICIT does. I can't think of anybody else like them in the area. So again, I'd say, look at the social media outlets out there.
Thank you, panel. I'm told we're out of time, and we need to respect the next panel that's coming up so that they can get their information out. I want to thank the panel members for sharing the information you did today. For the folks in the audience, please reach out to us either on the break or afterwards or via email. We are resources for you, and we want to think the same of you for us. Please join me in thanking the panel for a great discussion.